everyone. Welcome to Join 2020. Excited to have you here with me. My name is Chris Billett, and I'm a sales engineer here with Looker for Google Cloud. I've been with Looker for about 6 years. I've worked with some of the smaller SMB companies and now are working with some of the larger Fortune 500 companies, specifically focusing on the telco, media, entertainment, and gaming space. Today in our conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about media analytics and some of the common challenges that we've seen across our customer base and across the industry, and then how some of the Looker customers have actually gone about solving some of those challenges and really enabling analytics across the entire organization. As we take a look at the media industry, there are a number of different data points that become important to the companies that are ultimately taking advantage of those platforms. Some of the things that you might care about might be the different device types that people are interacting with these streaming services on, the different locations, the different user behaviors that they have across these devices and across these locations, and then also maybe some of the technical specifications. So understanding, how well are the videos actually performing in terms of bandwidth and in terms of throughput and things like that. So really talking about creating an optimal experience for those streaming customers. Now, why are media analytics so essential in this industry? I think there's a couple reasons. One is first off, as everyone knows with COVID, the acceleration of moving to streaming platforms and doing some of the cable cutting has been drastically accelerated, just given everyone's current circumstances of working from home and being at home. Now, why is Looker important to this picture? That's really key. It's going to give you the ability to start to enable those analytics that are essential to driving growth in that business with the whole entire organization. Now, if we take a look at some of the common challenges within the industry, these are going to be things that cause for a lack of actionable insight in a lot of cases. There's really two things that have kind of created this problem, if you will. One is the explosion of data. So as there are more and more streaming platforms available, the amount of data that is readily available to be analyzed is constantly growing and is never going to shrink by any standards. Along with that, there's also a lot of data fragmentation across the industry. So if you think about some of these customers or companies, I should say, coming from legacy style TV and actually broadcasting over maybe satellite or a cable network, but then potentially providing the same shows over a newer, more modern streaming platform. There becomes a lot of challenges with starting to marry that data and create a holistic picture of how the business is actually running. If we take a look at a few of the key points that these customers are looking at or that these media companies are looking at in terms of democratizing data and really some of the analysis that they want to look at, there's kind of five key pillars that we think about here. And the first is smarter content creation. So as we think about these users, we want to create content that is very tailored to the specific audiences that we have on our platform. And even more than that, think about enhancing their consumer personalization. So really making sure that people are getting the right content at the right time. We're suggesting the right recommendations for the right user age groups or the right demographics. If we think about ads that appear within this platform, that is a very, very important money stream for most of these businesses, and tailoring and personalizing those ads so that the recommendations make sense for what the person is viewing and they're not watching a cartoon and getting an ad for something sports related. That really streamlines the customer experience and is something that is crucial to maintaining growth and retention on these platforms. The last 2 points here are more focused specifically on how you get data across the organization. The first is just that ability to efficiently collaborate and share around that. So delivering information to the tools that people are already using today. That might be a chat app, that might be through email, but really just getting it into their hands quickly and in a familiar place so that they can start to make those data-driven decisions quickly. The last really is, as you start to scale out these analytics to a much, much wider audience, you also need to think about governance and really have a good understanding for standards and making sure that the business knows how it wants to analyze these different data points, and then making sure that everyone is on the same page so that there isn't a large differentiation in the meaning for these different metrics, KPIs. So we're going to take a brief overview here of the Looker platform. I know that we probably have a very diverse audience in the session today. Some people that, this might be their first time seeing Looker and hearing about Looker and just are curious to learn more about the media space. Others that might already be using Looker today and are very familiar with some of these core tenets. But I want to quickly touch on a few key value props for Looker. The first is that we're going to be entirely web-based. So there is nothing to download or install to your local device. Coinciding with that, we are leveraging the power of the database that you've selected and really trying to leverage the investment that you're making there. So Looker sits directly on top of that database. It does not ingest any of your data into an in-memory engine and really leverages the horsepower of that database to run those analytic workloads. Additionally, Looker is an API-first company, so anything that you will see in a demo or in any content within my presentation, but also others that join, are things that can be done programmatically via the API if there are developer workflows that it makes sense to build those things into. And then we also, I think this is pretty well known, but we also support multi-cloud strategies. So whether you are within the Google ecosystem, AWS ecosystem, Microsoft ecosystem, or all of the above, Looker is really striving to give you the ability to connect to data in all of those places and hence get a unified view of your business. When we take a look at the next slide here, I think one thing that's really important is talking about enabling the entire organization, as I already started to allude to earlier. And you can see up here at the top, we have 5 different personas that you might find within a media company, a media and entertainment company, that is, and some of the common questions that they might ask. And you can see that those users might range from the most technical users in the company all the way up to, say, executives who might not be as technical, but really still need this data to make their day-to-day decisions. So the idea with Looker is really to enable that whole audience. And as I started mentioning, really delivering that to the place that's most familiar to them. So for a lot of the people that are down in the weeds in the business, that might actually be interacting with the Looker native BI app. For others like executives, maybe that's receiving some kind of scheduled PDF or some very tailored message when some kind of action or some kind of trigger is reached within the data. So maybe a little more programmatic there. At the bottom of the screen, what you'll see is some of you may be familiar with Looker blocks, which are essentially templates for different types of analysis that you might want to do on top of your data. These could be specific for data sources, things like Google Analytics or the Google Marketing Suite. But these also could be specific for analysis types. So things like understanding subscription analysis or affinity analysis. People that watch show A are also likely to watch show B. The idea here, right, is we know that there are a number of different use cases that are going to come up across a media company. And we've started to standardize and templatize some of the things that we've seen across our customer base to really decrease that time to value. On the next slide here, we're just going to talk a little bit about Looker's architecture for a second again, and some of the different facets that people might consume information through, and some of the life cycle that we see in terms of building on top of Looker as well. So here on this slide, you can see that Looker is in the middle of your screen there, and it's going to sit directly on top of that data warehouse, as mentioned before. And we're going to directly execute SQL against that database, and then go ahead and return a result set back to our users there. Now, I think when we start looking at the top, this is really kind of the iteration that we've seen in a lot of our customers within media specifically. On the left side there, they're going to start with the native Looker BI app. They're going to build a data model and really start to think about those standards and governance and how the company wants to think about a lot of the metrics and KPIs that are really most important to them. From there, that's where it starts to be a little bit more data-driven in terms of actual day-to-day workflows. So we start to think about integrating into the tools that people are actually using. So maybe that's embedding Looker directly within Salesforce for an ad sales team. Maybe that is, directly firing reports or alerts into Slack because that's where our company tends to consume most of the information. And they also want to have the ability to have conversations around data. But moving all the way to the right side, maybe there's even some very custom workflows that need to be created or branded solutions. So in a lot of media companies, brand might be one of the most important aspects kind of across the whole entire organization. So as we talked about, using that API or embedding via iframes to start to create a very custom and tailored solution that maybe doesn't look or feel anything specifically like Looker, but starts to give people the data that they need once again in that day-to-day workflow. And so just to kind of reiterate there, we really see kind of an iteration in terms of stepping stones from moving from just the native BI app all the way up to something that's more custom and integrated with exactly what the business desires. We're going to take a look now at 3 specific use cases that we've seen across the media industry. And this is not specific to one customer. This is something that we've seen across our entire customer base. And I'll actually say this is something we've seen in both media and gaming. I think that, there's a lot of synergies between those two industries. The first that we're going to talk about is subscription analysis. So understanding, what tiers of subscription on your streaming service different users are falling into and how users are actually upgrading or downgrading those plans. So you really can understand how many users you have in any given tier at any point in time. And one of the keys here too is also going to be the audience creation. So the ability to start slicing and dicing by the different tiers that these user groups fit into. And as I mentioned before, we were talking about Looker blocks, and we actually have a Looker block that is specific to this, and I will highlight this a little bit later during the demo. It is a state change or status block. And so the way to think about this is if you were to take any moment in time, you could essentially dipstick into that data and determine how many users fit into any given category. So this is a time series style of analysis, but it then is also going to tie to things like audience creation. It's also going to tie to things like upgrades and churns. So there are a lot of retention graphs that may also come off of something like this as well. The next analysis that we'll take a look at, and this is the one that we'll primarily look at today within the context of the demo, is going to be our content and viewership performance. So this is really understanding what content on our streaming service is performing really well. Are there certain pieces of content that people watch after another piece of content? So this ties to that affinity analysis that I brought up earlier, and that is another block that can kind of be applied within this context. And then we also talk about maybe even some automated workflows here, right? So automatically triggering certain reports or events to be fired off if shows are viewed a certain amount so that you can see as traction in the show is gaining, maybe there are some immediate actions that you directly want to take on top of that. Maybe you want to create an audience and send some kind of marketing campaign directly to those users who are watching some specific show or some specific genre. So a lot of flexibility on this side, but I think that this really starts to talk about some of the keys to what drives success within these streaming platforms. And a lot of that is centered around what content is available to the users and how are they actually getting to that content. The third use case that we've seen is a pretty interesting one, and this starts to touch a little bit more on the platform capabilities of Looker. And so this really would be starting to expose analytics externally to your customers or to your partners. So something that's very common here is using Looker's API or iframes to create a custom application that, say, a partner to a media company could log into and understand, well, how is the content that I'm actually creating performing within this given platform? And so that's where you really start to drive more value even with the massive amounts of data that are being captured, because not only is it valuable internally to the company to understand how you can optimize and create a better experience for these users, it's also then valuable to your customers or your partners, the people actually creating the content that may not be within your organization, but they need that data to really drive a better experience on your platform. Depending on the structure of any given media business, right, this might be something that you could monetize, or maybe it's just a value add that you're providing to other companies that you're working with. Either way, the flexibility to start having analytics be available to people outside of your organization is a very powerful notion that can also help drive growth and also thought leadership as well, because there are not a ton of companies out there doing things along these lines. In summary, there's really three key tenets here when we think about Looker with respect to the media industry. And that's going to be the ability to start unifying metrics across all of the different business segments that you have. So as we've talked about, ad information, subscription information, viewership information, potentially some of the tech level information as well too. So things like the bandwidth and things like the performance of the app, more of the engineering side, and maybe programmatically alerting on some of those things. The next is going to be deriving meaningful insight, but in a very quick way. So as we talked about, really enabling the entire organization. So those people that are very technical and know how to interact with the data, but also those folks that maybe are going to consume the content that's created by others and providing that in a really meaningful way. And then the last here is going to be very specific to media, but understanding audience experience and creating actionable outcomes there. And I think that this is something that we've kind of talked about throughout the whole presentation, right? Everything drives that customer audience and how they're impacted by the different things available on the streaming platform. And so that's really where things kind of come together is bringing all these different data points together to really enhance that audience or customer experience. What we're going to do now is we're going to get ready to take a look at a quick demo where we can actually view a streaming website, view some different videos. We can watch those videos be directly piped into BigQuery in this case. And you can actually see the tech stack that we're going to be using in this case. So we are using a Google suite of products, and then we are putting Looker on top of the data warehouse that ultimately will be storing that information. So now as we jump into the demo, what we're going to look at is we're going to take a look, as I mentioned, at a streaming site, and then that information is going to be piped directly into a BigQuery instance. And then we have Looker sitting on top of that guy to do some analysis there. So the first thing that I may want to do is if I scroll through our site here, you can see I have a number of different videos I could choose to play from in this case. And I'm going to go ahead and choose our Caminandes y Amigos video. This one tends to be my favorite. When I go ahead and open that video up, you'll see it's going to start playing an ad. We get some information about how much data is actually being transferred. But what's pretty cool here is if I go ahead and inspect the page and jump over to the console, you can actually see the events that are firing off as the video is playing. So here you can see I have an ad started event, ad first quartile, ad mid quartile, ad stopped, video start. So we kind of see all the events as we're actually traversing through the video there. If I go ahead and I'll pause this guy for a second, and we can jump over to our Looker dashboard. And this Looker dashboard, as mentioned, sits directly on top of the Google BigQuery data that has the information from that streaming service. You can see here are a listing of those video titles and some information with respect to the ad funnel for each of the different videos. But something that's pretty cool here too is we can actually see a lot of these events flow in near real time. So if I hit clear cache and refresh on this guy, we'll actually see that it's going to run a new query, and you can see a couple new rows were piped in. This row right here is actually representative of the video that I just went ahead and played. So there was 39 events that were fired off. We saw a subset of those there in the console. And the reason I know this is me is because you can actually see we're up in Truckee, California, where I currently reside. And what we're going to take a look at here on this dashboard is, some of that viewership information. So we've done some transformation to this data set where we've determined, what portions of the video people have watched. So in this case, you can see what that drop off looks like across all of the different videos that we have. We also can get down to the row level detail. So maybe I want to know more about, say, these specific sessions. I can click on that 18 and we're going to get the row level detail for all the events that were actually fired off in those sessions. So here's where, for those of you that might not be as familiar with Looker, I like to think of Looker as Google Earth for your data. So if I'm, that executive and I want that high level kind of overview of the whole map, well, I might just look at something at, say, a dashboard level. But maybe I'm an employee and I need to get down to that quote unquote street level. I can always drill down into that data because we're sitting directly on top of the database and really have access to all the data that is available there. One thing I probably should have mentioned before as well is you'll notice that we have 4 different functional areas at the top. Those in some sense might delineate the users that we have. So browse is where all my content lives. Explore is where I'm going to create all of my content and then quote unquote publish it into browse. Develop is where I tell Looker how to write SQL against my database. So this is that governance and standards portion. And then admin is just admin, as you would expect. That's all your standard administration functions. Now, taking a look back at the dashboard here, everything is also going to remain interactive. So maybe I only want to look at, say, the data for the past 3 days. I can go ahead and hit the run button in the top right corner. And we're going to watch the tiles of the dashboard update to reflect those changes. So in this case, you can actually see that we only have events from California in the last 3 days. Now, maybe I want to know more about one of these specific videos. So in this case, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the same one we were looking at before, the Caminantes Tres Amigos. And we can already start to self-serve even at the dashboard level. So talking about that content and viewership analysis that we mentioned before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to a Caminando specific dashboard. So you can see when we click on that video title name that we're now brought over to a dashboard that is specific to that piece of content that we've selected. So you can see that title here in the filters, as well as up here in the actual URL of the dashboard itself. So this is one piece of content that we're dynamically passing the title of the content into. So if I wanted to look at a different piece of content, it's not actually a separate dashboard or anything. It's all managed under one specific piece of content. Now, scrolling through this dashboard, you'll see that we have some information here with respect to how many events were there today. A lot of those actually coming from myself, just watching the video a second ago. We can see how many sessions did we have yesterday, how many complete views. And if I scroll down, we can see some funnels that are then specific to the actual video itself. So here we can see kind of a weird anomaly in the data. It actually looks like a few people jumped to the end of the video and didn't watch that middle segment is what we're seeing there. So that could be something that's worth exploring. Maybe there's something at the end that has our users very intrigued. We can also see things like what devices are they coming from. And if I want to interact, maybe filter or remove some of these, I can do that easily by clicking on those legend items. And then we can also see the events in real time themselves. So maybe I actually want to see specific events that happened and what time and where they came from, as well as have those things mapped geographically. One of the things that I think is really important is these dashboards are really meant to be jumping off points into some of the analysis that you might want to do. So for example, maybe I want to look at this device breakdown and further slice and dice that. What I can do is I can say explore from here, and that's going to take me up into that self-service environment within Looker. So maybe now I want to look at, instead of say the total number of sessions, maybe I want to look at one of my specific ad metrics. So maybe I want to look at something like the number of, let's actually go with ad starts in this case. And on the left side, you can see I have a number of different fields that I can choose from. And then in this case, maybe I actually want to also look at this by the given ad system that it's coming from. So maybe I want to pivot by that value across the top. Go ahead and hit the run button in the top right corner. And we're going to execute that query against BigQuery to go ahead and return me the most relevant result set. From there, maybe I actually want to visualize this data, and this is something maybe that I'd want to clean up now, knowing that my null values are actually not my Google ad sources as these GDFP are, but these are actually Facebook ads. So there is some modeling that we may want to do based on what we've derived in this data set by hopping into the Develop tab. And really what I'm trying to emphasize here is starting to serve all of those different contexts of users, right? So maybe I'm a executive, and so I want to, interact with that dashboard level. If I'm more of that power user, I might get into this explore context. And then from here, once I've created a data set, maybe I want to, say, ship that over to another tool that I'm using. We could use a webhook to really pipe that into any system we want, or maybe I want to, send this over to a platform like Marketo to target some specific customer group. This is not all of the integrations that are currently supported. There are a number of others, as well as the ability to start creating customs as well. So the idea here, right, is knowing that there are lots of different types of users across your media organization, really trying to figure out what is the experience and workflow that's going to enable them best to make data-driven decisions and ultimately provide data out to maybe others that they work with within the organization as well. The last thing that I want to touch on is just that notion of looker blocks that we talked about. So if we hop over here to this next web page, you can see that I've loaded up a few of our different blocks that are available. I've specifically chose to open up a couple. We have our our status data, and we have our affinity analysis as well. Now, if I go ahead and take a look at either one of these, what they provide is they provide a data model as well as potentially some underlying content to help you build and get to that type of analysis faster. We really think of that 80-20 rule here. So thinking about doing 80% of what we've seen across our customer base, but knowing that you may need to customize this 20% to fit your business needs and the things that are most important to your key stakeholders. We will also be creating some media-specific templates and content. That is something that should be released here shortly after the Join conference. And it will essentially package up a number of these different blocks and put them all together in a context that makes the most sense for media. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. And looking forward to hearing any questions or comments that you may have about this session. Have a great day.